Mr. Bruce, how are we?
Hey, Mel, I'm okay. How are you?
Not bad.
Good. There's our fearless leader.
Dr. C.
Here I am.
We haven't heard from anybody, have we?
Nope.
All right. So we're not sure where John's here. We're not sure where Ryan is, Dave Ryan is going to be. So let's wait just a couple more minutes. I got 3 after 1, and then we'll start.
Yeah, Dave's got his handful in Exeter, hands full
Oh, I bet.
of school district business. It's been a rough ride, and particularly in that district right now. So,
What are you hearing, Bruce?
just it's been very, very tough, very divisive. He had to make a last minute, late last week, the school board, 24, 25 people, made up of all of the towns, made the decision to go fully remote after having decided a few weeks ago to have a hybrid model. And it's engendered a lot of attention in the communities and organized. I know we're on, this is a public meeting, but I'll use the term harassment of teachers and of superintendent and threats as reported by the media, reported by Seacoast Media, because of some parents' unhappiness about schools not being open and feeling that it's teachers that have forced the schools to close and go to remote 100%. So there's a lot of tension right now between teachers and community and superintendent's office. And it's a little more obvious there. We know that this is happening in many districts around the state. And my own, daughter teaches in Deerfield, and my granddaughter is going to school in Barrington, which is 100% in person, but there's a lot of anxiety there about going back fully in person. There are no good or right answers here. Everybody's
There's not.
going in the dark with their flashlights here. I know Corinne and Littleton, things feel a little bit more remote perhaps, but I expect that all the emotions and uncertainties are still there.
Nothing justifies the harassment or
No.
threats, but I certainly feel it here. And while our kids have graduated from high school, I can really I can't imagine the not only the emotional but other stress on top of having to deal with a pandemic and all the risks associated with that and everything that you try to do to hold down a job. Maybe it's 1 or 2 jobs in a single parent household, and now all of a sudden your 3rd grader is remote. And there is, Bruce, you said it, there is no perfect answer on this, but I think the pressure on parents given certain situations is enormous right now. It'd be great if we had a little bit more cover for the more support for superintendents and school boards who are caught in the crossfire on this.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, let's, I see we're all here with the exception of David. So let's call this work group together and start the meeting. This is a remote meeting. We are recording this meeting, and we need to have a roll call of those who are on the work group. And I'll start with myself, Mel Myler, calling in from Port Clyde, Maine. Susan,
Susan Heward from my office in Concord.
Corrine,
Corinne Cascadden from my home office in Berlin, New Hampshire.
Senator Morgan,
John Morgan here at 51 Lake Road in Brentwood, New Hampshire.
then we have Chairman Luno,
Dave Luno here in Hopkinton.
and we've got then our Carsey experts here, Bruce,
Bruce Mallory, Kittery Point, Maine, in my office at home by myself.
we have Senator Khan,
in Keene at home, and lots of chaos going to be going on right now. It's just going to keep moving.
Sarah,
Sarah Bogey from here in Dover, New Hampshire.
and Jordan.
Jordan Hensley, also in Dover, New Hampshire.
We also have Jenn Foor, who's our legislative assistant for the House Education Committee. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, Jenn Foor calling in from Concord, home alone.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we need to accept the notes from our meeting on August 3rd. I need a motion for that, please. Those were forwarded to you earlier in an earlier communication.
I make a motion that we approve those minutes.
Again, seconded by Corrine, moved by Corrine, seconded by Susan. We need to have a roll call vote on that, on voting for acceptance of those minutes. I vote aye. Susan?
Yes.
Corrine?
Yes,
John?
Yes.
Okay, has moved and second and passed. All right, the first thing that we need to kind of look at today, and again, for those people who are listening in, if you've got questions, make sure you note those in the Q&A section at the bottom, and we'll get your response to those to you after the meeting. First thing we need to look at is Carrie is going to give us a little update on the educator survey that was conducted in late June, early July. And she and Sarah have been going through, you'll recall that survey was a lot of open-ended questions, and they have been basically tabbing those questions, and they want to give a preliminary background to what their findings are, with a more formal report coming later. Carrie or Sarah, who's going to take the lead on that?
I am.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Carrie.
I was missed in the roll call, so I'll just say
Okay, sorry.
Carrie.
Carrie.
Carrie Porter Dover. I'm here with my cats, Pee Wee and Turbo.
You muted yourself, Carrie. There you go.
I think Susan has a cat named Turbo too. So I'm not going to give any sort of highline findings from the surveys. I might say a few comments just based on the current analysis. But the analysis is going really well, so I will talk about the timing. We're using frequency counts for the latter half of the questions that are open-ended, and then saving quotes that kind of expand on common trends from those questions and then unique responses. And so I think, what we are finding is that there is I will say that there is a barrier is seen on the reliance of property taxes and the challenges that communities are facing, which I don't think is a surprising finding. And just the challenges that communities are facing with the balance of towns voting to keep property taxes lower, funding for schools, and kind of the complexity between those two different spaces in terms of making decisions at the community level, what schools need, what's being mandated for the schools. And so sort of all the conversation that is swirling around in those areas in terms of school funding between town budgets, property taxes, and then the socioeconomic and property value inequities around the state. I mean, just the differences of, you know, more property value in certain towns than in others based on rurality as well. I think some of the other findings that we have is there's a big focus on family and parent support right now and access to technology. I don't think that's a big surprise based on that's layered with the pandemic is an assumption that I'm making from the findings. I'm trying to think what else. I guess another finding is that just the focus on teacher quality and teacher salaries is also something that's been a consistent focus throughout the respondents across districts, across communities, and across positions. And so those are kind of just briefly some of the key areas that are coming up over and over again. And I think some of the findings from this survey will help inform some of the questions and some of the groups that we engage with moving forward.
Carrie or Sarah, talk a little bit about, if you can share with us how you quantified the open-ended questions in creating a scenario around how people responded because of those open-ended questions. How did you do that?
So what we did is we created a series of initial codes based on what we're hearing in the commission meetings, based on the readings, based on meeting minutes. And then we each coded the first 50 responses to confirm that our codes made sense. But as we coded each response, we also edited those codes. So if another code needed to be added, we could. So when I say codes, I mean things like facilities and buildings. So these are categories. These are categories because we're doing frequency counts of what's mentioned. And so we'll share numbers, but then we'll explain what those numbers mean. Right now, we're just counting and kind of moving things into position. And so there are codes like buildings and facilities, access to technology, transportation, reliance on property taxes, teacher and staff quality, class size, charter school access and funding, just a general category that the current funding system isn't working or there's a problem with it. Things like student performance, that's a big catch-all, so we'll do a lot of explaining in that one. And there's a series of others as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah, Sarah, any comments? You want to add anything to Carrie's comments?
No, I don't think so. That's great. Yeah, that's our process. And I guess just one small thing to add, we do have the demographic information from the survey as well. So we will be able to do some cross tabs where we're able to look by the type of community that folks are working in, whether that's rural, suburban, urban, or a mix of community types, and look at their responses to the open-ended questions and do that for a variety of demographics.
When will the report be ready, do you anticipate?
So we'll be done coding the open-ended questions at the end of this week, and Sarah's running analyses on those questions. Then I have to look at the final 2 questions and look for some themes. And so I think that we will have, like Sarah and I talked this morning, and I think that we'll have just a brief, like a 3-page high-level overview, maybe 4 pages on August 31st, and then a more full report probably a week or 2 later, depending on my schedule.
Do we have questions of Carrie or Sarah?
And we can share more detail if people are interested, but I think that's I think that's pretty good to share so far.
So Mel?
Yeah, Dave.
You know, and this is great, and I'm really looking forward to you know, this report on frequency counts and analysis of the questions. One of the questions I was hoping to get out at this morning's fiscal policy work group, and we ran over a little bit, so we didn't get to it, but you know, I want to take it up real soon. We've had some testimony in fiscal policy, actually it may have been a full commission meeting, I'm forgetting now, from Lincoln Institute, Daphne Kenyon, who talked about who basically talked about the over-reliance on any specific revenue source when funding something, and that that's not looked at necessarily as good tax policy. And clearly, property tax is one of your questions here. But what I wanted to put out to fiscal policy, and I'm hoping we're going to get to it real soon, is there a difference in revenue source when looking at the local education property tax versus a statewide education property tax? Is that considered the same revenue source or two different revenue sources? Even though clearly the root is both property tax, but they technically they are supposed to behave very differently. And so I'm just sort of, that's something we want to consider. It may be, I don't know how, I don't know if it's something that comes out in your analysis, but maybe it does. Maybe it does when talking about the difference in rates and stuff like that.
I think what is coming out is, what people's understanding is of the process, and so part of the opportunity for this public engagement portion of the commission, the study, is to show. So, Sarah and I were talking this morning about what is the purpose of these reports from the public engagement activities? And it's really to help inform the commission in terms of kind of the decision making or, your process, but it's also part of the archive of findings from this. So it's to show what is the sense of public knowledge, understanding, concerns, challenges, barriers. And I think one thing that has come up is the need for more public engagement and learning around the issue. And so I think that there may be some misunderstanding based on the comments I've read about the difference between exactly what you were just talking about.
Great, thanks, Karen.
If that's helpful.
It is.
Other questions of Carrie or Sarah?
Actually, and just a comment on that.
Yeah.
When we talk about it in fiscal policy, it might be really good to have Sarah and Carrie and Mel, talk about what the public response has been, on that particular issue.
Yeah, good.
Is that on the 31st as well?
Yeah, I don't think we haven't set the agenda for that meeting yet, but I think we probably want to take it then.
Okay.
Great. Okay, good. Okay, let's go to the next major issue we're going to deal with. And Carrie, can you put up the Granite State items for the poll, please?
Yes. Oops, I'm sorry. I just pulled up the wrong thing. Can everybody see?
Yep.
Bigger, better?
There you go. That's good. Yeah.
I've
So why don't explain what we've got here, Carrie?
Okay, so this looks a little messy. I understand. I acknowledge that. And so these are the comments on the right are from the UNH Survey Center, Sean and Zach. They took some time to edit the questions. So I accepted all their track changes. So we just see the questions as they've edited them. And then they have some comments on the side. So Mel, what do you think the best way is to go through these comments?
I just review them.
Okay, go one by one.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. So demographic questions, there were some questions about what demographics are asked on each poll. So on each poll, age, sex, region, level of education, income, party in the community people live in are asked, as well as employment status. Some of the other areas that we asked was school district you live in drop-down list. And the suggestion from them is that it's such a granular demographic that I believe that, so it says, given the very small ends that would be involved, we wouldn't be able to aggregate school districts in a useful demographic variable. So I would say we won't add that one. In terms of current parent in public school, they just suggested we clarify. They said that can be a yes or no question, and then previously had a student public schools. Do we want just public schools or any kind of school in New Hampshire? And then in terms of property owners, said they can ask about property owners or renters. They have an existing question. They don't encourage asking out of state. And so I think my suggestion would be just to remove the school district you live in and then add the other two. And I think we're all set for demographics.
For a point of clarification, Carrie, this survey is administered to a panel that is pre-selected by the survey. So it's not a random voter list, for example, that there's a panel that they use on an ongoing basis to basically do these kinds of surveys, correct?
So this is the explanation they provided. So it's they're statewide polls using randomly selected respondents from the Granite State panel. So it says this is a probability-based web panel of approximately 5,500 panelists. We have recruited from randomly selected phone numbers by conducting phone or text to web surveys, then asking them to join the panel. So it sounds to me from this explanation that it's a sample from this 5,500 panelists.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
And they were randomly.
And I'll just add, it is sampled to be representative of New Hampshire resident population of 18.
So this 5,500 came from a much larger universe of which they then focused in on these 5,500 people to utilize as their universe for surveying as representative of citizens across the state.
And any given Granite State poll then samples about 600 or 700 of these panelists.
Right, yeah.
So
Okay.
it's a subset of that total.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to scroll back up here. So let's move on from the demographic question.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, Carrie.
Yep, that's
I
fine.
wanted to ask though about the question on do you have a child in school?
Yeah.
Or the other way around, current parent. But the previous had a student in the public school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a helpful question.
No, I don't either.
Okay, great.
No.
And meaning that you just get too far out from the experience. That's just not going to be helpful.
I agree.
Great. That's perfect because, you know, as a reminder, like they want us to avoid nice to know questions and keep asking ourselves what's core and then also how does this help make decisions? So, and making sure questions are succinct. So the first question, I'm just going to read through each of these is, so they provided some framing. So next are some questions about public education in New Hampshire. First, how much on average do you think New Hampshire school districts spend per student? So Zach said, you know, we recommend something like this up front in order to get a baseline of knowledge that respondents have about school education funding. So then respondents would enter a dollar amount. The next question, what percentage of public education costs do you think are currently funded by the state government? and then and simply entering a percentage 0 through 100% to get a sense of what the public thinks. So this next, any comments about those first two framing? Those are additions or reframe of our original questions. Good. Okay, next. So on average, New Hampshire, sorry, I'm gonna minimize everybody. On average, New Hampshire school districts spend approximately $19,000 per student each year, and the state government pays for approximately 31%, approximately $6,000 per student of local public education costs, while the rest is covered by local governments. In your opinion, do you think that the state government should increase its funding to local public education costs, decrease its funding, or keep it about the same? And then the choices are increase funding, decrease funding, keep it about the same, don't know. And they said that they've had similar questions asked in the past about state government funding to UNH. Any comment on that question?
So, so just on the state share of 31%,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you include the statewide education property tax, which doesn't really behave like a state tax. It behaves more like a local education property tax.
Okay.
So you know, so I just want to put it out there. With if you took SWEPT out of that, the state share would be more like 20%, not 31%. So you know, I think that there's reasons both ways. I mean, the SWEPT technically is a state tax.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't look like one, or it doesn't behave like one.
Right.
And I think people are going to, you know, might feel that their local property taxes include the statewide property tax. And I mean, I don't know.
No, I think that's an important point. I think the question here is, what's the lay understanding or interpretation of how property taxes pay for local schools? And I don't believe, want to hear from others like Corrine, that a taxpayer would necessarily make that distinction. It's my local education property tax and state education property tax. They're all paid for in that property tax check that I write. And so I think I would recommend assuming that it's a single property tax payment by any given taxpayer that's contributing roughly 80% of the total local education costs. But that's how I would see it, but I'm open to others as well.
Yeah, I think if you break that up so that you might say the state allocates 31%, but a third of that is derived from a statewide property tax.
That, you know, that's right, but it may be a distinction without a difference,
right.
For most people, and you know, even, I mean, let's look at it differently. Let's look at it, you know, let's say 5 years down the road, that we're looking at a statewide property tax, local education tax, and the non-state property tax state contribution. And I could still see people lumping together their local ed tax and the state property tax. And I think that's fine. I mean, that's their contribution to public education. That's their contribution as opposed to the state's contribution.
Right.
So what are you saying, David, about the 31%?
I'm thinking for most people, it's like what Bruce said. you know, people are going to feel like they're paying 80%. The state's paying 20%. And you know, unless I mean, that's, people can do the math on their, you know, looking at their own tax bills, and they're not going to see a state share of 31%. Unless they really understand the difference between a swept and their local ed tax.
Right. That's exactly what I did before we got on today, is pull out my tax bills, because I have one for the town of Errol and one for the town of Berlin, to try to figure it out. And I think most people probably combine school taxes, state education tax, and local tax. I don't think when they're paying their tax bills or receive their tax bills that they're distinguishing between the two. They just know they got to pay them both. And how does that relate to the local expense? I don't think many people would know that that state tax actually stays locally and we get additional fundings. Whereas the town of Errol might be the opposite. I don't think people think that. So I know what you're saying. If you say 31%, is it deceiving? I don't think the common taxpayer distinguishes between, you know, differentiated aid and adequacy, base aid. I think they just see it all as one package. So it is going to be different for different people, different communities. But
Are you saying that
I would keep it all together, I think.
you're saying to keep the 31% there?
I'm thinking that because the common person, I don't believe, understands that Berlin or whatever community gets X amount more dollars if a kid can't read above the proficiency level at 3rd grade. I don't think there are many that understand or know that you get more money based on how many free and reduced lunch kids you have. I just don't think people who live in the community, unless they're really, you know, splitting hairs, I don't think it's common for them to know all that. I mean, I don't think they just make it, they don't make it their business to know all of that. They don't understand that. Because we don't really explain that, really, to the Joe Q on the street that lives next door. It says, here's your tax bill, so much for school, so much for county, so much for town.
This is a tough question.
It is, because we know the system. And so the data that we want is got to be pretty specific.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're polling, you know, the general public, they won't be able to drill down those differences, I don't think.
I think maybe it might be helpful to go through all the questions and come back to this. My apprehension here is that we don't want the lack of state funding to be tied to the overdependence on local property taxes. I don't know how to separate it right now. That's why I'm thinking if we see some of the other questions.
Okay, let's go down to question 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so question 2 is, in some communities, taxpayers pay less than $3 per 1,000 of property value in combined local and statewide educational property tax. While in other communities, taxpayers pay as much as $24 per 1,000 in education property tax. Would you favor or oppose changing this so that everyone pays the same property tax rate to fund public schools in New Hampshire? And then the choices would be strongly favor, somewhat favor, neutral, somewhat oppose, strongly oppose, don't know, not sure. And then we still want to make sure that the numbers are correct from the DRA and have a citation.
And this question has been asked in the past so that there's some tracking on what changes might have happened when they had done this question 2002 or whenever they did it, correct?
Now that question wasn't asked in 2002, number 2.
But they said that they've asked similar. Go back up again, Carrie.
Yeah.
Zach said that this is Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong one. Excuse me.
This one is, this number one that I've highlighted
Yeah.
is similar to what they've asked in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
And then this number two. Further down is one they've also asked.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think that gets right at a question that needs to be answered.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at 3.
Okay. Currently, New Hampshire funds over 60% of total public education costs with local property taxes. I'm going to read the whole thing. In your opinion, should the percentage of public education costs funded by property taxes increase, decrease, or stay about the same? So I think he's just saying you can get rid of.
David, doesn't this question, well, the 60% is the wrong number. Doesn't this question get at what you were asking before?
Yeah, I think it does. And yeah, the 60% is more like 65%. When you look at the total number. Obviously in some districts it's, less than 10%. Yeah, I think it does get it. So I think rolling back to question 1, I think it's sort of, these questions are supporting looking at question 1 as a 32% state share. That the state property tax is part of state revenues that fund schools. And then just for clarity, in 3, would you, rather than funded by property taxes, would you funded by local property taxes? Or now are we getting too nuanced?
Well, maybe number 1 and number 3 ought to follow each other rather than put number 2 in the middle, because it seems like if you're talking about a certain percentage of state tax to fund education, then the next question to me should be, then what's the percentage of funding from local property tax, so that those 2 amounts come out pretty much to, so people can see what the total cost is in the breakout right off the bat. So, oh, the state only pays 31%, and now my local property tax pays 65. Wow, I didn't know that. And I think if the questions follow each other, people will make that connection. I don't know. Any thoughts?
That does sound logical.
And then that might answer the question of, state education or local, the state education tax versus the local school property tax. So that's where you would have the breakout. That might be more understandable.
I think that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think most people who, who go to school district meetings and vote on budgets understand that the budget that they're voting on affects the local education portion of their property tax and not the statewide education property tax. And that's where they feel their pain.
Yep.
Ready for number 4?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Number 4, would you favor or oppose the creation Would you favor oppose the creation
Of the following.
of,
That is just, yeah.
thanks, Corinne.
Yeah. Of
Would
the
you favor
following.
or oppose the creation of the following in order to decrease the amount of local property taxes that fund education in New Hampshire? Strongly favor, somewhat favor, neutral, somewhat opposed, strongly opposed, don't know, not sure. And so Zach's comment here is, we think it would make more sense to ask about whether respondents would favor or oppose each of these options. And so they've changed, they just changed the Likert, the scale.
I like it better, actually.
And so these are the options that they're talking about here.
Are they going to rank order them or select one?
So I think what that'll be in this case, it'll be a statewide property tax. They'll select strongly favor to don't know, not sure, and same for income tax. Same.
Oh,
for,
okay. So they will rate each one.
I think so.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Does this need to talk about dedicated funds? Meaning, if we talked about this before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would your opinion change if you knew that the funds being raised were dedicated to education and reducing local property tax?
We had a little bit of a discussion on this at the fiscal policy meeting this morning too, and that's up to the voters to decide.
Well, I see that as implied in the question, not explicitly, but at least implicitly, because the decrease in the amount of local property taxes affects the way we fund education. So it implies a substitution of one of these alternative sources to fund education. Maybe that's too implicit and nuanced, but I do think that dedication question is at least implied here.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it says directly here, in order to decrease the amount of local property tax.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. Okay.
Ready for the next one?
Yep.
Wait. The other category here. Just wondering, that's what's caused me to think about it. It was other dedicated fund.
You mean other existing taxes?
You know, this gets to, we didn't want to ask about gambling or marijuana or business taxes, but one exists and the other two don't.
Well, hasn't capital gains been tossed around as a,
Yeah, no, there you go.
Yep.
Another one.
So something like other existing taxes or other dedicated funds instead of just other?
It was the other dedicated funds that or other funds dedicated to schools.
would it be state funds, other dedicated state collected funds?
Yeah, I mean, you use the word tax in all the other, in the three other examples. I would stick with using that word.
Mm-hmm. Other state taxes.
Yeah, other state taxes.
All right,
That's a good way to put it.
That's good enough. Yeah.
Okay, great. Ready for 5?
But just
Sure.
quickly on that one, I assume that what Zach will do with that one, other state taxes, if they say, either strongly favor, somewhat favor, there should be a probe so that the person asked what.
Yeah.
So it simply says other state, that's not going to give us much if they simply say other
No,
state taxes.
True. Yeah.
So let them name it if they,
Yep.
Okay. Good, number 5. All right, which of these comes closest to your opinion on what New Hampshire should have for our school funding system? So there are 3 here. A state funding system that distributes money to districts based upon differences in poverty and property wealth. A state funding system that distributes money equally to every school district. Don't know enough to say about this to say. And so this was simplified from the language we provided so as he says, avoids language that could load it. So some of the bias or assumptions that were embedded or potentially embedded in the last wording. I can read it again if it's helpful for people to hear out loud, or it's fine to process quietly as well.
For me, it's a possible confusion between low income and wealth. It's just one's low, others high. Differences between differences in poverty.
One of the questions I have in the question, and that might be what Zach was referring to, would be that in your opinion on what New Hampshire would have to ensure an adequate education for all students. To me, this question is really focused on the making sure that that students have some kind of equal access, and that's not in the queue. That might mean what he means to avoid a loaded question, but isn't that what we're trying to ask here?
the goal is adequacy, whatever that means.
Exactly.
The goal is adequacy. So I agree with putting that as a qualifier in the way you're describing it. And then my thought about Jay's comment, poverty versus property wealth.
Right.
Would it make sense to, rather than using the term poverty, just use the term household income? That's really, it's differences in household income and differences in property wealth in any direction that's related to the differences in funding.
I think you could do that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like the wording of the first bullet. The second one, I think, is somewhat loaded. Because what's wrong with distributing money equally? I mean, we all know. But it sounds really good. Could that question instead be asked that should the tax burden be equal for people across the state?
Well, or you could, to avoid what you're raising, Dave, what if it said a state funding system that distributes the same amount of money to every school district? I mean, that may be a hair, but that I'm splitting.
Well, I mean, if I answer no to that question, then I'm basically recognizing that there are disparities that you can quantify in terms of dollars between different school districts.
Well, you don't answer no, you choose one of these.
This is important to get right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
I think it's the same amount per pupil to every
Yeah,
school district.
that's good. That's a help. That helps.
Yeah. Per pupil.
I missed
Yeah.
the comments on this one, but we can go back to it.
I liked what Bruce said.
Just change poverty and household.
It did address what I was interested in.
Yeah, I think that's a household word. Household income is enough of a household word.
Yes, and I think property wealth should stay there because
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like those changes.
Okay, and then the second one, a state funding system that distributes the same amount per pupil to every school.
Just, yeah.
Well, I don't know what we're asking in the, with the second one. Then.
Well, you
I mean,
want to
the
know
court-
if
the
they
court
want, if
already-
they prefer the first or the second.
Right.
Right.
Well, the court's already said this isn't about horizontal resource replication. To me, that's what the second one is getting.
Right.
Okay.
And so we've already
Oh,
been told
that's
by the
true.
court that that's not, you know,
So that wouldn't meet the tenet of the courts.
right.
Yeah, well, but the problem is even if you're not meeting what the courts say, that doesn't necessarily mean what public opinion is saying.
Right, yeah.
That's true. But but even people who disagree with what the court has said seem to agree that this isn't about giving you know, town A the same amount as per pupil as town Z.
What are you basing that on, though?
Just basing it on having had these meetings since January, and we've got people who have disagreed with the court opinion, but agreed that but feel very strongly that the state shouldn't be spending its limited resources equally to on a per pupil basis to every district. I'm just saying I don't know what a yes answer means on, or what a yes answer, what the second, you know, bullet means. I don't even know where to go with that.
And I will interrupt here just a minute and say we don't have to ask all of these questions. We just want to get to the kind of some core pieces of public poll that will help the different work groups in the commission and just have a sense of public thinking. And so some of this may and could align with some of the models that AIR is putting out.
Well, I think they could align with that, but I think they could align with other opinions too. So if we, and I'm not saying I agree with some of these other opinions, but and I'm still learning through this whole process. But if we look at the equitable outcomes and the equitable taxation concerns, but let's just look at equitable outcomes. That could mean doing what you've got in the first bullet here, but it could also mean targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And both very, very different things. But the second bullet wouldn't get at either one of those. It wouldn't get at equitable outcomes, and it would not get at targeting.
So maybe let's hold on this question for a minute and move to question 6, and we'll come back. So we know we have to come back to question 5, and we know we have to come back to question 1.
Yeah, I still on number 5 want to know whether or not we can deal with the question around adequacy.
Oh, okay. So saying,
you know, in not to belabor this, but my thought was in order to provide, in order to ensure an adequate education for students in the state, which of the following?
The only thing about adding in the word adequacy, just based on what we've seen in the educator survey responses, is a lot of folks responding to the questions about how to define adequacy and what are important components of adequacy have responded saying that they don't like the term adequacy, that they don't understand it, or that they think the bar should be quote, quote, higher. So I just wonder if by using the word adequacy, there might be some confusion then about how to choose the next questions. Because what if they say, well, I don't think we should provide an adequate education. I think we should provide whatever adjective that they believe is more accurate. Then they might be confused about which to choose. I don't know if that makes sense.
How about equal educational opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Do people
I love
equate?
the conversation. I love what you guys just said because I hate that word.
Which word do you hate?
I hate adequacy. I just that word.
Right, we need to get past that, though. It's a term of art, and it doesn't necessarily relate to the
I know.
definition of adequate.
It's the A word, as we call it, just the A word.
Yeah, just call it that.
I love the O word because opportunity is what's in the Constitution. I'm sorry, Corinne.
Oh, that's all right. I'm just trying to think of other terms that people might understand, either minimum standards or school approval. I mean, is it the assumption that all schools are state approved? Do they all follow minimum standards 100%? I mean, we haven't had school approval process for a few years now, but it used to be, you used to be able to determine which schools meet all of the minimum standards and which need to do some work to meet them. Are those terms that mean close to the same or the same? It might be understandable to the public.
I think one thing to keep in mind here is, and coming back to what Sarah was saying, is what's the pulse? Like what kind of, we're asking it to get a sense of what communities think, their beliefs, their attitudes, their perspectives on certain areas of school funding. And so I want to raise us up a little bit. And so let me ask this question again. It's the question right now is, which of these comes closest to your opinion of what New Hampshire should have for a school funding system? And so you could add, so students can access, you know, and insert something.
Or a school funding system that supports, wait a minute, I lost it. Sorry, I thought of something. School funding system to meet the tenets of the New Hampshire minimum standards. Or maybe a different word.
How about a school funding system where schools get more support from the state? Or next bullet, leave it up to the locals. I mean, it's
keep it simple.
Yeah,
So which of these comes closest to your opinion on what New Hampshire should have for a school funding system? And then it's, you know, probably select one. A state funding system that distributes money to districts based on differences in household income and property wealth. A state funding system that distributes the same amount per pupil to every school. And then a final state funding system that allows for local, I don't know.
And state.
I think we're overthinking this.
Yeah,
I don't even know if we need the question. Do we really need that question?
I think that's a legitimate question. I think Corinne's question is legitimate.
That is also what I wanted to, I agree. That we did not have to have this question. We don't have to reword it.
No, but I do think, though, that it juxtaposes key issues we've been talking about. And that is the issue of poverty. That's the issue of equal access. I think this is a question that we have been struggling with. I mean, are there feelings of these people who are being surveyed? Is there a feeling that the system should help fund those household incomes that are lower than other household incomes? I mean, or you know what I'm talking about. So that would be the question I'd raise to the group on the question of whether or not this should be asked. I think that's a basic question. And whether or not, because I don't think, if I remember the other questions, we've not asked this question before.
Well, people who can afford to provide more for their school districts are going to want to continue doing that. So it doesn't make it equitable in terms of what kids have for opportunities. So I don't know how you can say to somebody in a property wealthy town that says, well, your schools can only offer this because not all schools can offer that. I don't know.
If I am concerned about students throughout the state,
yep.
All right, then I would answer yes or whatever the cue is to the first bullet point. If I'm worried about the workforce development throughout the state, not just the students in my community.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the only query that I have for this particular item. I don't know, Jay, this kind of comes down to the whole adequacy question, doesn't it? I don't know, if I'm the only one hung up on this, then we can go on, but
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not what if you got, I mean, Carrie, what would you do if you got, 2,600 responses with the first option, 2,400 responses to the second option, and I don't know, 1,000 responses to the third? How would you evaluate that?
Yeah, and what is it? I think that's a great reframing of how to decide if this question is needs to be asked in this poll. I think we will get to the answers and some stories and lived experiences about these questions based on the other public engagement activities. Not to say we shouldn't ask it, but I think that's an appropriate question to ask, Dave. I think based on the fake results you just shared, I don't know if it would really tell us much other than maybe there's some slight leaning in one direction or another.
Because we are driving at the first bullet.
Yeah, Sarah,
mean-
Jordan, and also, and Bruce,
Yeah.
if you have thoughts about that as well. I would encourage us to move on to, we have one more question to go through, and perhaps after that discussion, we'll be able to revisit 1 and then 5 with a maybe a little bit of a different sense of clarity.
How is this ranked question asked? These are all this is all being done over the phone, right?
These are web-based panels, so it's like a survey.
So they go to the web and do it. Okay, so they can see it. Okay.
Yep. So they'll have a
Got it.
visual of these
Okay.
questions, is my understanding. So Mel, are you
Are
okay?
these the same categories that you are working through when you work on the report from the educator feedback?
They're similar.
They're similar, okay. Wasn't sure if they were the same.
So let me read through question 6. In your opinion, which of the following do you value most in order to provide New Hampshire students a high quality public education? So the recommendation is having respondents rank 1 to 5, and the list will be randomized as people respond. So it won't inadvertently guide people to, people just pick the first 5. And then they added the directionals for clarity. So in terms of like increased teacher salaries, increased teacher quality, better technology, smaller class size, better school leadership, higher learning standards, better quality of classrooms and buildings, better social, emotional, behavioral support, transportation, food services, more extracurricular programs, better curriculum content, better special education, more early childhood education, more English language learner support, more career and technical education, more advanced placement courses, more low-income student support. Others, please specify. And so for advanced placement courses, it could be, electives. They're a little different, but
Yeah, this is, I'll just say, this is kind of an eclectic, kind of a smattering of items drawn from the current cost allocation, cost formula for costing adequacy by the DOE. This is drawn obviously from 193E and from standards. So I actually hard to defend that this is the right list. Probably, half of this we could defend. The others feel, some things feel, they're sort of random, like more extracurricular programs. That doesn't draw on any state standards or statutes. Better school leadership, there's reference to the role of school. Well, actually, that one's the salary of building principals is included in the adequacy costing formula right now for by DOE. So it's all I'm saying is that this is a long list, and we might benefit by paring it down a bit. Looks like you just did.
no, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, this was an initial brainstorm, but
Right.
yeah, I agree. Let's do some clarification about what is most useful for us to ask in terms of, the commission's charge and what you've been finding and the different.
Do you really need to use the word better and more? Can't you just use the terms? Because you're asking people what they value and rank the most.
I can ask Zach about that because they added those.
What they did?
Yeah, they added the
Qualifiers.
yeah, the qualifiers.
For advanced placement courses, would it make sense to add in that same line rather than another category? dual college enrollment or dual enrollment or Running Start, which is really a pathway that we've tried to promote significantly for kids. Whereas advanced placement courses are taught in the high school by a high school teacher, different curriculum. It does not link a high school student to the community college system, unless you're talking Running Start or dual enrollment.
Okay.
So our policies were linking all that together. I don't know if people would understand that. I don't know. I'd ask Susan to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I just want to qualify that what we had as input at one point is that, with the 41 courses that every school needs to offer, those that meet those minimum standards don't have the advanced placement courses. That was, one of the claims. Whereas I just think that they're kind of different. That career and dual enrollment kinds of things are I mean, anybody could be offering that, right? That's the teacher's qualification, not the ability. Yeah. Any school that's not doing it is because they don't have master's level teachers, and it goes back to the teacher quality, I think.
Right, that's for Running Start classes. Not dual enrollment would be enrolled in community college.
Community college, right?
Yeah.
Which may be the distance that you've got to the area. I'm sorry.
So Bruce made the suggestion, and I would say we can build on this suggestion. Is what are the key pieces we want in this list? This is an initial list based on a variety of materials, and so let's go back to what is core here to ask. So it could be that what's core to ask is increased teacher quality, and that includes a variety of and we're finding in the survey we've coded many things as teacher quality, and there's quite a variety of different perspectives on that, like qualifications for teaching AP classes, like what was just talked about. So looking at this list, going back to Bruce's comment, what are some of the core elements in order to shorten this list up quite a bit, and that will be helpful for the commission to know at this point? So for instance, is it helpful for the commission to know if the public ranks more extracurricular programs as most valuable in a public education? Or is there a broader term, or are there other terms based on the charge of this commission or areas that are most important to ask at this point, knowing that, a lot of these are concerns of the public in general? I'll stop there. It's also something we can discuss internally amongst us as CARC staff, and then come back with a list instead, if that's helpful as well.
What I was going to say was, one criterion for our purposes would be just to include those items that are explicitly cost sensitive. So as we think about how do we fund adequacy, and how do we fund our school systems, so as an educator in the past, at least, I'd have a hard time arguing that for example, better curriculum content or better school leadership or even higher learning standards are directly cost sensitive. You can have better curriculum content without spending an extra penny. You could potentially have better school leadership without spending an extra penny. So again, I'm just trying to find some, and you're already striking these out, so that may be premature, but I'm trying to find a way to narrow this down and have items that again, go back into what has to be funded, even more advanced AP courses or dual enrollment or running START. Those are program arrangements. Those aren't necessarily additional expenses that have to be incurred. I understand there are expenses incurred with all of this, but I'm trying to kind of create find a threshold for what's directly going to need to go into an adequacy costing formula.
Well, I would take out more low-income student support. I don't see what relevance that would have.
Well, I think for us, that's where differentiated aid comes in.
I see. Okay.
So that is, it costs more.
Okay.
We know, to educate low-income kids. And
Yeah. Okay.
So it's I don't know. Stop and let Dave and Jay, Mel.
I like what you just said, Bruce. I was looking for what was my criteria for wanting to eliminate those same two. I have a similar feeling about transportation, that better transportation really is dependent on your distance from the school. I don't know what you do with better transportation.
Yeah. It's less directly related to the student's educational experience, except it gets them there and back home, at least if you're K-8. If you're in high school, you may not have it. And if we can narrow this down to, let's say 8 or 9, then we might ask people to pick their top 3 just to force a little more focus and choice to be useful to us in terms of results.
I'm not sure you need teacher salaries there. I think teachers, the quality is a question that people are going to ask more than anything else.
Yeah, that I will remind us that the research that Reaching Higher is doing right now is looking at the correlation between what teachers get paid and what the student outcomes are at the district level. So kind of dovetailing a little bit with that effort to see what kind of results we get.
And I think one thing that's come up a little bit in the school district survey is a concern about paying staff and teachers in general and the differences between districts, as well as accounting for health insurance and benefits. And so teacher and staff salaries has come up quite a few times. So if we remove, so I'm going to remove these and we're going to look at the list without these. So I'm moving better school leadership, higher learning standards, better transportation, better curriculum content. I'm also going to remove more advanced placement courses. And I'm going to remove this one. So now, based on those, we have a list that says increased teacher salaries, increased teacher quality, better technology, smaller class sizes, better quality of classrooms and buildings, better social, emotional, and behavioral support, better food services, better special education, more early childhood education, more English language learner support, more career and technical education, more low-income student support, and in other place specified.
You can still take out better food services because now it's redundant, I think, with the example given.
Yep. So now we have a much shorter list that would be amenable to selecting a top 3 as Bruce suggested.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go back to Let's just go back to question 1 again, Mel, or where would
Yeah,
you?
yeah, let's do that, yeah.
Okay. And I'll clean this up again for everybody. I know
What's our timing on when they're gonna need this?
I would say we should wrap this up soon. And so I think it would be okay to clean this up one more time based on the feedback right now in this discussion, put it out to the full commission for email feedback, and then give it back to the survey center.
Right, okay.
But that process can be edited based on the leadership of this commission, Bruce, Jay,
Okay.
etc. Dave.
So are we good on number 1?
So concern was about 31%.
What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I think leave it at 31% because I think that is consistent with how you've got the questions below, and honestly, I think it gives the people listening to this survey or taking the survey, the state's doing 31%. It means that property tax, local education tax rate is picking up about 65%, and I can sort of should the local be paying more? Should the state be paying? Well, what's the share? So I think it's fine.
Okay. Feel like we're good on the new number 2, 3. And then the last one we needed to go back to is number 5, where we have these 2 different choices or don't know enough to say. And so what would selecting one of these choices, what findings from selecting one of these choices, what would that tell the commission in terms of public polling, and how would it be helpful? And we may decide we don't need this question, and that's okay.
Yeah, my 2 cents is I don't know that it would give us additional information in moving forward.
It's what could, the alternative could be, I'm not advocating for this, but the alternative could be a really straightforward yes/no question. You believe it's the state's responsibility to provide more funding to school districts that have fewer resources to educate their students than other communities. I mean, it is a redistribution kind of a question.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
That's an attitude or a belief question. Yeah, the state should smooth those things out and reallocate, redistribute, or no, that's not the state's job. I don't know that we should ask that question, but I think that's kind of what we're grappling with here.
Yeah.
And
Well, I do think that question or this one, unless I'm missing something here, I think it's an important question because we're talking about how do you deal with impoverished school districts.
Mhm.
And I'd like to know what folks think about that. I think it's an important question. The yes and no question is fine. It will give us data.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Mel.
I do like that option, Bruce, of what you just recommended, because then you can walk away and know how most people feel.
The only problem is the redistribution word.
Okay.
I don't know how you get around it. It is the question.
Well, said another way, I think it ties into what Mel says all the time,
right.
Which is we got to be, rather than my kids, it's our kids.
Yeah.
So maybe the question could be asked, how important it is to pay for my kids, my neighbor's kids, and the kids that live in other towns. I mean, isn't that a redistribution question?
Oh boy, it is. You just don't want to get a yes for my kids and a no for.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's not so much what we want to get; it's what the Granite Staters think. And if, I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't not like local property taxes and I only want my kids.
What I liked in Bruce, what he's trying to do, I think, is get us to a yes, no, don't know enough to say kind of question. So I think that kind of simplicity is, and I heard us, but it just, the redistribution is generally gets a pretty lousy reaction from.
So it's, you can use the word allocate, or appropriate. Yeah, people are familiar with that term.
Allocate funds based on.
Or just
Well,
use
I
your
asked a
state
different
funding
question,
system.
Carrie, I had a more explicit question than you've got here. I said, do you feel the state should, I'll say, allocate more funds to districts with
Local property
higher
direct.
need, I forget how I said it, but the idea was higher need students than to communities that don't have a lot of high need students. Now I've messed up the way that I phrased it earlier, but.
And does it?
I can go back and watch the video.
Well, the other thing that's not here, and again, maybe this is a weighted statement, but the issue is, the reason why this is an important question is to ensure that all students have equal opportunities for an education. That's why we're asking this question. I mean, that's what this is focused on, but the survey folks may think that loads it up, and I understand that, but for me, that's the importance of this question here. Because what have we found here? I mean, AIR has basically told us that those who are poorly funded don't perform as well. So I'll get off I've said this now 3 different times.
I know, but the Newark question does get to that, and it's worded differently.
Yeah.
That would give us information, but I'm wondering if, looking at the terminology, if we should include the same terminology in some sense for people to understand, like, do you feel that the state funding system should distribute more funds to districts with higher needs students than students with fewer needs, a goal, equal opportunity?
I like that. That's better.
It kind of uses that terminology from that first bullet.
Yeah.
It's the state funding system and the distribution of funds.
So you can say distribute, not redistribute. And
Right. Should distribute. I know it means the same as allocate, but I think distribute might be a more common word.
And it's not a lightning term like redistribute.
Right.
Can you say that one more time, Corinne? Do you feel that funding should distribute?
State funding system should distribute funds to districts with higher need. Oh, wait a minute. Do you want to mention students versus property wealth?
So
With greater need, wait a minute, with students of greater need than students that have fewer needs. But that's really not what it's about. That doesn't address, that's.
I'll find it in the recording.
Yeah, I think that what I think Carrie can do is look at that and also check with the survey people, because they know how to ask some of these questions in an unbiased way. So we've got a vested interest in here. So Carrie, if you could look at that and then get back to us on what they think might be best way to do that.
I got to relate this question that came up in the radio broadcast today. The interviewer, who's a pretty skilled guy, says, it's needs that should we fund needs differently? I mean, needs are two, and he went on, needs are defined, you're defining two types of needs here. Right. One is the needs of students, and the other is the needs
of communities and taxpayers. And we get confused by this all the time, right? I think this question needs to sort out what it exactly is asking about higher needs.
Yeah.
Is it the higher need of the student or the higher need of the community?
The community.
I just want to pose that question. I don't have the answer to it.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Senator.
No,
That's
that is good.
Well, I thought he asked a great question.
Okay, Carrie.
Senators
So
are good at that, Mel.
Uh,
Carrie, we're all set then on that, right? So you're going to get back to us on that.
But somebody should sort that one out. As to what we are really asking with this.
And that tension comes out in our survey findings as well as student need and for student performance and community need and community household income poverty wealth. So a bunch of what we talk about. So yeah, I'll look at this again, go back in the recording and listen, and I'll have a new draft for everybody for the whole commission on Monday, if that is okay with everybody. And anyone who had something they wanted to say or think of something you want to email it to me, that's fine as well. I'm open to that. But yeah, I hope that this will be like one more round and then we're gonna
wrap it up. Yeah. Okay. Carrie, could you then put on the screen the graph that you have of the various activities, which I thought was kind of neat. You know the one I'm talking about, right?
Yep. Okay, so
Good.
This is a review of the work group tasks, and then also where we're at and where we're potentially going. Mel, would you like me to walk through it?
Well, I think we've been through the stakeholders. We're doing it with the school survey. We just talked about the Granite State. On the student voice, let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so the plans for student voice right now is I've begun to think about lists. So I've talked to Susan Heward about contacts at the community college level, hoping that we'll be able to find students who are first year out of high school, New Hampshire high schools, to participate in the groups. We're also reaching out to some youth community organizers who work with youth in communities, and then also we'll reach out to principals, and I welcome other suggestions. I'm putting together that list now. The goal is also to coordinate with some materials, a video, accessible learning materials. And so having those ready, are able to link to those, and then the dates and times for the focus groups and the public commenting periods. I want to be able to send that all out in one email so that we can, students can be ready, and having the materials that, I'm meeting with Reaching Higher tomorrow to talk about where they're at with their materials. They are creating accessible learning materials. Hoping that we can align all that so that students have something to base their thoughts on.
Any questions of Carrie on those plans? Okay, let's.
Carrie, I do have a quick question.
Yes,
just
yes,
going back
Corinne.
to the Granite State poll we were just working on. Do you know what percentage of respondents would make it a successful return? I mean, is there magic percentage?
I don't have an answer to that question. I would have to go back and see what some of the response levels are from, they're doing, what Zach says, they're able to do quite a few more. they're able to do a lot more of the polling because it is web-based now instead of phone-based.
Mhm.
But I don't have a sense off the top of my head of what the response.
What they do is they sample of that 5,500 or whatever panel that they have. They'll contact those folks with a goal of getting like the numbers around 700 respondents of the 5,500. And so they'll keep reaching out and contacting those prospective respondents. If they don't get any response back from somebody, they go to the next one. If they realize they're oversampling for males versus females, then they'll adjust their outreach to compensate, as well as geography and other demographic differences. So, so it's not, you know, casting a paper survey out to the wind and hoping that 10 or 20% people respond.
Right.
In this panel mechanism, they can really target who they're contacting in order to fill their what's really a stratified random sample.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Next, dealing with the focus groups part 2. Carrie, you want to talk about that a little bit?
So Michelle and I have talked a little bit about this in terms of, and then also within the work groups, this has come up. So the next section, we're not going to do as many as we did in June with the stakeholder focus groups. We did 12. We're going to do one of each here, maybe 2 of. So we'll have a municipal and school leader, what I call a repro. So we'll invite school municipal leaders back. And we'll also make sure that we're getting participation from missing communities from the first time, if they're interested. Taxpayer associations, and then 65 plus residents. And that comes having, you know, the conversation about the balance between just the different perspectives of property taxes and what it takes to fund schools. And so those were the two additional focus groups we landed on. But that's.
And how are we identifying the 65 plus the taxpayers association?
So 65 plus residents, I just put out, I'm just beginning to reach out to some folks through UNH who work with older population, and hoping they'll provide me some, similar to what we did with the school and district employee survey and the stakeholder focus groups, having some key organizations that will help us push the opportunity out. But I'm just beginning to brainstorm about that. So please, if there's any suggestions, I'm open to hearing them.
What about New Hampshire AARP?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And I think you also have, various retired groups that might be available too. For example, you have the Retired Teachers Association, which also takes in administrators, etc. I believe the State Employees Association also has a retired group that might be interested in this too.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Feel free to send me other suggestions as well.
The next deals with the Legislative Learning Exchange. That date actually should be November, not October.
Okay, and I wasn't quite sure.
And the reason for that is that I think the intent here, at least as David and Jay and I have talked a little bit about it, is to try to ensure that those who are newly elected, or those who are engaged in this process, are those who are going to be in the legislature the next session.
Mm-hmm.
And that the intent would be, at least my intent would be to do 2 different things. One is to provide an education around some of the findings that we in fact have had, and some of the as a result of those findings, the foundation that is the premise for any recommendation that we have. And then the second thing then is to look at how those findings provided us a look at various opportunities. And then third, the final thing is the recommendations. Because what will happen is that as a result of this sharing of information, to try to focus some legislative initiatives that are based in fact and foundation rather than just random. Knowing full well you cannot stop random acts within the legislature, but to try to provide much more of a, you guys have done this work, you've come up with these recommendations, here's where we might want to go from a legislative standpoint. Dave, is that kind of what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think you're right on that, Mel.
Okay, all right, okay. And my sense is that would be done fairly soon after the election results are known. Because I think that this will become, in the election process, my sense is the commission is going to have some focus in the dialogue around the governor's race, the Senate race, et cetera. So it will be a fairly relevant conversation through the elective process here. All right. And then we've got the final summary report and engagement summaries then in November, just before we issue the report in December. Questions around our task here as we move forward?
And so I think the only guidance I would give is like and then others can comment, is just remembering the tasks. So I will continue to bring forth designs, questions we're going to ask, summaries and findings. And so, continue to provide your input as you see fit.
Good. Okay.
Good.
So are we good?
Hey, Mel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to also mention, well, you were on the line on Wednesday when we had our extended public comment.
Yeah.
I thought we had, and I thought, as in the first one, we had very useful, productive public comment. So I think that's working really well. And is that something that do you want to weave this into this work group's collection?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unfortunately, when we've had these hearings, I've been at Dana-Farber and not been able to really participate. But as I read the notes, the detailed notes of this, I think there's very good reception and participation in this. I mean, for example, what we found out, Bruce found out earlier this week, that we had nobody from Carroll County in the original session. And I think, Bruce, your response to the two inquiries that you had were appropriate. David, you're providing opportunities both during the commission meetings, plus these others. I think there's ample opportunity for people to engage. And yes, I do believe that those public engagements, Wednesdays, and we got a couple of them still left to do, should be woven into the feedback that we have here.
Mm-hmm. And I think also particularly if we may want to, I mean, we've had basically July, we have public comment at the end of commission meetings, and that may be 5 or 10 minutes. But then we've got these hour-long sessions. I think there could be action items that that we want to follow up on that drop out of these that drop out of public comment, and we just might want to comb through and make sure that we're that we're following up on those.
Right.
So
Good.
We've got a number of sort of what I call clarifying questions in the public comments as a result of now the initial AIR presentation a week ago. And again, this morning, the new AIR material this morning led to further clarifying questions. So we're tracking those, and we'll make sure that we'll respond to those sooner than later. The reality is that the AIR model and data are still somewhat in flux because they are. They released preliminary data that, the only way to find out if it's good data or not is that people look at it and say, well, wait a second, did you think about X and Y? So they're going back and tweaking their model and their weightings as a result. So once we feel like the AAR model especially is settled, then we'll be sure to provide responses to the questions that came in. And that will be true for all public comments. Those that are really clarifying questions, we can post the questions and responses on the website over the next, as they unfold. Again, we don't want to do it prematurely because we want to make sure we're giving clear answers to clarifying questions. But that's part of the process.
Okay.
thanks, Bruce.
Any other comments before we sign off and move to the adequacy work group? Thanks, Carrie and
12
Sarah. Thanks for your work on this. It's been very helpful. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to sign off and move in about 10 minutes to the next meeting.
It's a room down the hall. Go down 3 doors and turn it off.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
We'll see.